Welcome to the 9th lecture in the series Introduction to New Testament Textual Criticism. Let's begin with prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for preparing the path for us to walk, a path of good works, expressing the renewal that you have made. As you have revealed where we've come from and where we're going, guide us by your grace as we journey together along the way. In Jesus' name, Amen. We have been introduced to the basic materials involved in the field of New Testament textual criticism: manuscripts, early versions, patristic writings, and lectionaries. Today, we will take a look at one of the issues of the field. Specifically, we're going to examine the concept of text types. Now, I've already referred to the Alexandrian Text, the Western Text, and the Byzantine Text in previous lectures. Today, these things will be described in much more focus. A text type is a form of the text shared by witnesses that tends to support the same readings. Picture a handwritten book, which we will call Abraham. Then picture 3 more handwritten books, each of which is a copy of the text of Abraham. We will call these 3 sons of Abraham Frank, George, and Henry. These 3 sons are sent to 3 cities, which happen to be called Frankville, Georgeville, and Henryville. Now at this point we have 3 copies. 50 years later, Abraham and his 3 sons have gone the way of all parchment. But in each city a new generation of handmade copies are still alive, and each one says that it's a copy of Abraham. But in Frankville, they're all copies of Frank. In Georgeville, they're copies of George. And in Henryville, they're copies of Henry. At this point, we have copies of Abraham. 50 years later, those copies have begotten children, so to speak, and now we have 3 groups of copies of Abraham. Another 50 years goes by, and now we have in each city copies of Abraham. 50 years later, a textual critic comes along who wants to reconstruct the text of Abraham. So he collects a variety of the descendants of Abraham, some from Frankville, some from Georgeville, some from Henryville. And he notices that none of the manuscripts has the exact same text as any other manuscript. He also notices that the text in manuscripts from Frankville is usually longer than the text in the other 2 groups. He also notices that the manuscripts from Georgeville tend to include phrases here and there that are not in the manuscripts from Frankville and Henryville. He notices that the manuscripts from Henryville do not have a paragraph that's supported by the manuscripts from Frankville and Georgeville, and they tend to be more concise. While working on the premise that shared traits imply shared origin, the textual critic makes a deduction that the manuscripts departed from the original like 3 branches from the trunk of a tree. There are 3 groups of manuscripts that descend from 3 different points of origin. Each such group, consisting of manuscripts that tend to contain the same readings that set them apart from the manuscripts in other groups, is called a text type. The idea is not that all the members of a text type always agree, but that they consistently agree at some specific points where the members of the other text types consistently tend to disagree. Each reconstructed earlier ancestor of each text type is called a subarchetype, and the reconstructed ancestor of the subarchetypes is the archetype. Now that's a convenient picture of text types. Frankville would be like the Western Text, Georgeville would be like the Byzantine Text, Henryville would be like the Alexandrian Text. But drawing a convenient picture and drawing a picture that fits the real historical events that produce the existing evidence, those are 2 different things. In real life, there is one text, one form of the text, for which the subarchetype can be confidently reconstructed, the Byzantine text. And even in the case of the Byzantine text, which is generally supported by over 85% of the existing Greek manuscripts, there are some passages where the manuscripts are fairly closely divided between 2 or sometimes 3 rival readings. But because there are so many manuscripts to have a Byzantine text, quirks can usually be filtered out by a process of comparison. For the Western Text and the Alexandrian text types, there aren't enough Greek manuscripts to make that kind of history-based reconstruction. Let's consider the Western Text and the Alexandrian Text separately. For the Western Text, there are not a lot of manuscripts that can be arranged into stages of transmission. In the Gospels and Acts, there is basically one manuscript, Codex Bezae, with far more Western readings than any other Greek manuscript. There is also the Old Latin version, and patristic writings by writers who used a text that contained many Western readings in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries. But after the 400s, the dominant text type in Greek manuscripts was the Byzantine text. It is as if the citizens of Frankville invaded Georgeville and Henryville, and pretty soon everybody was speaking the language of Frankville, no matter where they were. After the time of John Chrysostom, the Western text died out in Greek, as the Byzantine text eclipsed the other two forms of text. The Western form of the text did not go away entirely. It was blended or mixed with the text of Byzantine manuscripts. When this kind of mixture happened, most of what had previously been distinctly Western readings were replaced by Byzantine readings. But there were still some Western readings that did not make much difference to the meaning of the text, and some of those were allowed to slip through. Now, copyists did not adopt a policy of, when in doubt, don't throw it out. Many Western readings that are longer than their Byzantine rivals, when a series of long Western readings appears in a manuscript's text, that's unusual. As I mentioned, there's basically one Greek manuscript that displays the Western text in the Gospels and Acts, Codex Bezae. And if copyists had retained the longer Western readings, those longer Western readings would have become the normal reading. Instead, we see shorter Byzantine readings being perpetuated instead, not just in a few contests, but in hundreds of cases. To emphasize this point, in other words, some textual critics have accused Byzantine copyists of approaching textual variants with an approach that said, when in doubt, don't throw it out. But in real life, that was not a normative guiding principle used by copyists making decisions between rival readings in their manuscripts. For example, in Matthew 1:22, Codex D and the Sinaitic Syriac add the name Isaiah, identifying the prophet who is quoted in the next verse. This makes the text more specific, it's a helpful reference, but the Byzantine text does not have this reading. The Western reading, if it was ever considered, was rejected. In Matthew 2:8, Codex D adds the detail that Herod spoke to them, that is, to the wise men, as he gave instructions. This is a harmless detail, but the Byzantine text does not include this reading. In Matthew 2:17, Codex D states that Jeremiah's prophecy came from the Lord, like Isaiah's prophecy in Matthew 2:15, but the Byzantine text does not include this reading. In Matthew 3:16, Codex D adds the detail that the Spirit of God came down from heaven, but the Byzantine text does not include that detail. In Matthew 3:6, the Alexandrian text does not simply say that the people came to John the Baptist to be baptized in the Jordan, but in the Jordan River. But the word river is not in the Byzantine text. In Matthew 6:15, Codex D adds you to the final phrase so as to say, forgive you your trespasses. But the Byzantine text does not include this detail. At the end of Matthew 8:13, Codex Sinaiticus and several other manuscripts smuggle part of Luke 7:10 into the text to round off the account of the healing of the centurion's servant. But this attempt at harmonization is not found in the Byzantine text. At the end of Matthew 9:15, Codex D has a Western reading that is longer than the Byzantine reading. Codex D adds, in those days, making the text a little bit more explicit. But this is not in the Byzantine text. In Matthew 10:30, Codex D has the word your in the phrase, the hairs of your head. It's a natural supplement to make. We see it in most English translations of the verse, but it is not in the Byzantine text. And in Matthew 10:40, Codex D specifies that a cup of water is being given in the name of a disciple. Clement of Alexandria quoted the verse in this form also. But although this detail is often supplied by English translations, the reading about water is not in the Byzantine text. Now, those 10 examples are just 10 of hundreds of golden opportunities to expand the text by adopting a longer reading. But that opportunity was not taken in the Byzantine text. The expansion was not made. Byzantine copyists did not typically settle textual contests by saying, you both win, and retain both readings. That doesn't mean that they never did this, but it was not their normal procedure. Now, the Western text is an ancient form of the text, but it is also a designed text. It's a text that has been adjusted, sometimes drastically adjusted, to emphasize the meaning of the text. The adjustments we see in the Western text did not happen in a single step. When we consider the amount of variation in the Old Latin versions, it looks like the Greek Western text was never fully standardized until the Vulgate. It was adjusted and readjusted to emphasize its meaning. In the book of Acts in particular, the Western text is much longer than the text of Acts in the other two main text types. And despite the name of Western text, it was used in the East as well as in the West. Papyrus 38 and the Glacier Codex, Papyrus 38, by the way, was probably made in the 200s. They support the Western text of Acts. At about the same time Papyrus 38 was made, copies were being made in Egypt that displayed what is called the Alexandrian form of the text. Whereas adjustments in the Western text tend to be made to enhance clarity, adjustments in the Alexandrian text tend to be much less drastic and more technical, making the text look a little more professionally produced. The Alexandrian Greek text of the New Testament circulated in Egypt and influenced the earliest layer of the Sahidic version. There are not very many Greek copies of the Alexandrian text. If you want to talk about an embarrassment of riches regarding the number of Greek manuscripts that support the text that you want people to adopt, you want the Byzantine text, not the Alexandrian text. The two 4th century manuscripts Vaticanus and Codex Sinaiticus, these generally display, most of the time, the Alexandrian form of the text. Where these two manuscripts share a reading that disagrees with the reading found in 95% of the Greek manuscripts, the Nestle-Aland compilation almost always adopts their reading, rejecting the reading found in the embarrassment of riches. For textual critics who consider the Alexandrian text to be the least corrupted form of the New Testament text, even readings found in earlier papyri often give way to readings supported by both Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. Where these two manuscripts both display the Alexandrian text, it has the best chance of appearing in its unmixed form. Now, speaking of mixture, let's look into what happens when text types collide. In Codex Regius, also known as Gospels Manuscript L, the Gospels text starts off mostly Byzantine, but it becomes more and more Alexandrian as you go. And this suggests that somewhere along the line a process of correction influenced the text in L. Someone who was used to the Byzantine text encountered a manuscript that contained the Alexandrian text and tried to adjust it by conforming it to something more like the Byzantine text that he was used to. But eventually he gave up and left a text that was mixed, partly Byzantine, but after he had his way with most of it, it became more and more Alexandrian. The text in Codex C is also regarded as an echo of an Alexandrian text that was partly conformed to a non-Alexandrian standard. The text of Codex W, as was pointed out in a previous lecture, is block mixed, and this includes Byzantine blocks, Western blocks, and Alexandrian blocks, as well as a block which could perhaps be described as non-Alexandrian Egyptian. And that block tends to be allied with Papyrus 45 in part of the Gospel of Mark. In practically all of the Greek manuscripts that are categorized as having a non-Byzantine text after the 500s, the Alexandrian text is not presented as clearly as it is in Codex Vaticanus. The text of substantial Alexandrian witnesses besides Codex Vaticanus almost always has a degree of mixture with either the Western text, the Byzantine text, or both. Some minuscules, such as minuscules 6 and 33 and 81 and 104 and 892 and 1241, have enough Alexandrian readings to justify categorizing part of the text as Alexandrian. But as a whole, they are not Alexandrian enough to justify calling them good examples of the early Alexandrian text from beginning to end. Now, I've already referred several times to the Byzantine text. What is called the Byzantine text form could also be called the Antiochian form of the text, the idea being that before the text dominated the churches in the region of Byzantium, it was already in use in the churches in the vicinity of Antioch in Syria. A form of the text that was essentially Byzantine was used in the 300s by Basil of Caesarea and by John Chrysostom, and slightly later by Theodore of Cyrus. The base text of the Gothic version of the Gospels, produced in the mid-300s, and the base text of the Peshitta, probably prepared in the late 300s with some tweaking in the 400s, also tends to agree with the Byzantine text much more than with the Alexandrian or Western forms of the text. By the time of the Emperor Justinian, in the mid-500s, the Byzantine text had become more or less the Greek text being copied. The text that is on display in most of the later minuscules is Byzantine, not because the Byzantine text itself is late, but because the minuscules are echoing their Byzantine ancestors. What else could they do? Their text did not come into existence in a flash of lightning. So we have basically three competing early forms of the text: the Alexandrian, circulating in Egypt, the Western text, circulating in a variety of locales, including Egypt, and the Byzantine, circulating in Syria and in the territory around Constantinople. The relationship of these three forms of the text to one another is one of the primary issues in New Testament textual criticism. We are about to take a closer look at that, but before we do, there are three more forms of the text that we need to learn about. The text of F1, of Family 1, the Caesarean text, the text of Family 13, and the Harklean text. First, Family 1. The text of Family 1 is a design text, but it's different from the Western text, and it does not seem to be attested outside the Gospels. It's best known in the group of Greek manuscripts called Family 1, especially manuscripts 1, 1582, 2193, 118, 131, 205, 209, and several others, including Codex Theta. This group is sometimes called the Lake group because the link between some of its most closely allied copies in the group was brought to light with particular force by researcher Christoph Lake in 1902 in the volume Codex I of the Gospels and its Allies. It used to be presented in the apparatus by a lowercase lambda, but nowadays that has been replaced by the designation F1, as in Family 1. Now, the Armenian Gospels were translated from a form of this text, and the Old Georgian Gospels were translated from Armenian. Because the Greek text of this type subsequently underwent considerable Byzantine mixture, the early Armenian and Old Georgian versions preserve the most distinctive form of this text type, which could be called also the Caesarean text, but it's Armenian and Georgian instead of in Greek. Although the individual manuscripts in Family 1 are medieval, some of the unique readings in the text go back pretty far back as Origen in the first half of the 200s. For instance, in Matthew 27, 16 through 17, Barabbas is named Jesus Barabbas. This reading was specifically mentioned by Origen, and it's usually not found in the Western or Byzantine or Alexandrian copies. Also, in the main copies of Family 1, the story of the adulteress, usually found as John 7:53 through 11, is located at the very end of the Gospel of John, accompanied by a note that says that because it was not found in most copies, and is not commented upon by esteemed writers such as John Chrysostom and Cyril of Alexandria, it was taken from John 8 and moved to that location at the end of the book. A second is the text of Family 13. This text is a frequent ally of Family 1, and its text has been put under the title of Caesarean by some researchers, but its main members, manuscripts 13, 69, 124, 346, and 543, plus some other secondary group members, they share a different line of descent, and thus they share some unusual readings, most of which look artificial, and some of which look like the result of adjustments that were made for the sake of making the text easy for lectors to utilize as they read the annual reading cycle. For example, in the margins of some Byzantine manuscripts of Matthew, there's a note alongside Matthew 26:39 that states that at this point, the lector is to jump to Luke 22, 43 through 44, and read those verses, and then return back to Matthew 26:40. In some of the members of Family 13, the text of Matthew has been adjusted so as to contain the text of Luke 22, 43 and 44 in Matthew, between Matthew 26:39 and 26:40. In addition, in the main members of Family 13, the passage about the adulteress is found at the end of Luke 21. Third, we consider the Harklean text. We see this form of the text in the general epistles. This is a Greek text that tends to agree with the Harklean Syriac version. The Harklean group is represented by some relatively late Greek minuscules, including 429, 1505, 1611, 2138, and 2412. And although these witnesses are relatively late, the text that they contain goes back to at least the early 600s when the Harklean Syriac version was made, and it probably goes back far earlier. In Jude, verse 3, where most manuscripts refer to salvation, the flagship members of the Harklean group refer to life. And this reading appears to have been around not just in the early 600s when the Harklean Syriac version was made, but in the mid-300s when Codex Sinaiticus was made. Sinaiticus' text of Jude, verse 3, combines the two readings in what is called a conflation, our common salvation and life. The model of text types in the Gospels is different from the model of text types in Acts. The Western text in Codex D is constantly anomalous in the Gospels, but in the book of Acts, the Western text is not only unusual in its form, but also often in its meaning. In Acts, the Western text is about 8% longer than the rival forms of the book. In the Pauline epistles, the Western text is still recognizably different, but it's much less remarkable than it is in Acts. The picture is a little different in the general epistles. There's more than the Harklean Syriac horse is in the race. In Revelation, for which there are just a little under 300 Greek manuscripts, the picture changes. Instead of having one fairly uniform majority text, like in the Gospels and Acts and Epistles, there are two popular forms of the text, one of which tends to reflect the text that was used by Andreas of Caesarea, and one of which tends to be allied with the uncial 046. So in Revelation, the majority text often is not much of a majority, and when there are three or more competing rival readings, there might not be a majority at all at that point. In addition, the text of Codex Alexandrinus has been regarded as especially valuable in the book of Revelation. So in each genre, in Gospels, in Acts, in the Pauline epistles, the general epistles, and Revelation, not only do textual critics need to account for differences among manuscripts, but for differences among text types, and this presents a different challenge for each genre. Now, in the first half of the 1700s, a scholar named Johann Bengel worked out some general guidelines on how to approach textual variants. Bengel deduced that when a single manuscript has a reading that is otherwise unsupported, that is, it has a singular reading, such a reading should be rejected as the effect of a copyist's mistake. And this instantly takes care of a significant number of textual variants. But Bengel also attempted to approach the text not just in terms of contests between individual manuscripts, but between the forms of text shared by groups of manuscripts, in other words, by text types. This was comparable to a shift from comparing the twigs on a tree to other twigs to comparing one branch to another branch. Bengel proposed one of the most fundamental canons or guidelines for the field. Difficult readings stand before easier ones. I'll say that again. Difficult readings stand before easier ones. In the late 1700s, a researcher named J.J. Griesbach expanded upon Bengel's approach, one of several researchers who tried to do so. But Griesbach realized that the witnesses tended to fall into three groups, and he thought that this echoed three earlier attempts to standardize the text. But how, when all three text types disagreed with one another, could one decide which one was more likely to be the original reading? Instead of simply favoring the reading supported by the most manuscripts, Griesbach developed 15 canons, or guidelines, to evaluate readings on the basis of internal evidence. Griesbach's 15 canons go something like this. Number 1. Now, this first guideline has more qualifications than the others. In a contest between a short reading and a long reading, if there's early support for the shorter reading is to be preferred over the more verbose reading. The assumption here is that although accidental omissions happened, copyists hardly ever intentionally removed text, but they tended to add text, making harmonistic additions by recollecting one passage while they transcribed a different one. Copyists may have lengthened short readings in order to clarify a Hebrew expression, or to clarify something that seemed otherwise ambiguous, or to make one passage more closely resemble a parallel passage. On the other hand, if it looks like an accidental error has occurred in which a copyist skipped from the end of one word to the similar ending of a following word or phrase, or if it seems plausible that a copyist could omit something that seemed obscure, or harsh, or superfluous, or contradictory, or downright offensive, then the longer reading should be adopted. And if the shorter reading constitutes a unique expression, whereas the longer reading is characteristic of the author's usage, then the longer reading should be preferred. And if the shorter reading conforms the passage to a parallel passage, making a harmonization, then the longer reading should be preferred. Number 2. A difficult and obscure reading should be preferred over a rival reading that is easy and clear. The thinking here is that copyists did not deliberately make the text harder to understand. When they prioritized meaning over exact form, they tried to make the text clear. Number 3. When one reading is stylistically more harsh than another, in terms of grammar, idiom, and vocabulary, it is to be preferred over rival readings which have no such stylistic difficulties that would provoke any change. Number 4. Rare words and rare expressions are preferable to ordinary words and common expressions. Number 5. Where the flow of an author's argument does not demand emphasis, readings that express less emphasis are to be preferred over rival readings that are more vigorous. Number 6. A reading that is agreeable to the concept of piety, especially monastic piety, is not preferable to rival readings that are not as agreeable. Number 7. Readings that have a superficial falseness, though actually true, are preferable to other readings that have no such difficulty. Number 8. Readings that do not explicitly express orthodox doctrine are to be preferred over readings that do. Number 9. Readings that look like repetitions added for the sake of symmetry probably are. Number 10. Readings that look like they're the result of a copyist losing his place probably are, especially if the reading constitutes the loss of a word or syllable that begins or ends like the preceding syllable. Number 11. The reading that best accounts for its rivals is to be preferred. Number 12. Readings that appear to be additions made to define or interpret the nearby text probably are. 13. A reading that looks like it is extracted from or based upon a patristic writing probably is. Number 14. A reading that looks like it originated as a phrase added to begin or conclude a lection probably did. Number 15. A reading that looks like it originated in the Latin text and was introduced from there into the Greek text probably did. Using these principles, Griesbach made a compilation of the New Testament that gave decisive weight to internal considerations. Some of his principles are just different ways of saying, prefer the shorter reading unless it can be explained by scribal carelessness, and prefer the more difficult reading, and the reading that is most likely to be original is the reading that best accounts for its rivals. These guidelines had a heavy impact on Griesbach's compilation of the New Testament, the second edition of which was completed in 1806. So before Codex Sinaiticus had been obtained by Tischendorf, before any New Testament papyri were discovered, while most of the manuscripts known to today's scholars were uncatalogued, Griesbach had organized the external evidence into three basic types or branches: Alexandrian, Western, and Byzantine. And he had proceeded to use internal evidence to decide textual contest in which each branch had its own reading. Although the quantity of manuscripts always favors a Byzantine reading, at least in Matthew through Jude, in Griesbach's judgment, internal considerations often favor non-Byzantine readings. To restate, Griesbach showed that a considerable number of Byzantine readings appear to be secondary on the basis of internal considerations, even though they're supported by a great majority of Greek manuscripts. Griesbach showed also that the Textus Receptus, the base text for the King James Version, was not only different from the original text, but it was also different from the earliest form of the Byzantine text. Now, shortly after Beza had published his Greek New Testament, more information on the New Testament in Codex Vaticanus became available. The weight of the Alexandrian text was gradually being recognized as being heavier and heavier, supported now not only by Griesbach's internal evidence, but also by the external evidence from Codex Vaticanus. In 1809, a Unitarian New Testament was published, prefaced by an introduction describing the Textus Receptus as capable of very considerable improvement, in which restated Griesbach's idea that every ancient New Testament manuscript supports one of three editions, either the Alexandrian form, or the Western form, or the form used in Constantinople. And it referred to Griesbach's text as one which corrected the Textus Receptus. Within a few decades, new English versions were produced which wholeheartedly embraced the text that Griesbach had edited. Abner Kneeland, the last man legally convicted of blasphemy in the United States, made an English translation in 1823, based mainly on Griesbach's text. In 1826, Alexander Campbell published an English translation called Living Oracles, also based primarily on Griesbach's compilation. Now, other people were involved in the translation, but Campbell did the publishing. A moment. In 1831, a researcher named Karl Lachmann published an edition of the Greek New Testament that he compiled using only ancient evidence, setting aside the ministerial manuscripts. This meant that Lachmann's compilation was built upon an entirely different Greek evidence than what had been used as the basis for the New Testament portion in the King James, or Authorized Version. In 1836, a scholar named Granville Pinn took things a step further by producing his Book of the New Covenant, which was, except for the books that are not in Codex Vaticanus, basically an English translation of an imperfect transcript of Codex Vaticanus, putting the Alexandrian text in the spotlight and rejecting the Western and Byzantine readings. Now, these developments may have seemed somewhat disturbing to the Englishman or the American whose New Testament, the King James Version, was being called very capable of improvement and not based on the best manuscripts, and so forth. It was concerning especially since Griesbach had connections with the theological liberalism of another scholar, Johann Simler. For over 300 years, Protestant English Bibles have been based off one form or another of the Textus Receptus, that is, with a relatively small smattering of variations, the base text of the Tyndale New Testament, the Bishop's Bible's New Testament, the Geneva New Testament, and the New Testament in the Authorized Version, also known as the King James. Well, all these were based off the TR. To most English readers, that was the Greek New Testament. How had the Textus Receptus obtained this prominence? Well, God willing, in the next lecture we will rewind a bit and explore the rise of the Textus Receptus. Thank you.